Right now, in a room in Vienna, one of the greatest composers alive can't hear his own music. There's a name people whisper for what's happening to him. Nobody actually has one yet. Ludwig van Beethoven, sometime in his late 20s, starts to lose his hearing. Not all at once. A ringing first, a constant hiss in his ears that never turns off. Then a fog, swallowing certain notes, certain voices, a little more every year. He starts positioning himself at dinner parties so he can watch people's lips. He starts avoiding conversations, not because he doesn't want them, but because he's terrified someone will realize his secret before he's ready to tell them. In 1802, still only in his early 30s, he retreats to a small village outside Vienna called Heiligenstadt, hoping the quiet countryside might somehow help his hearing. It doesn't. While he's there, he writes a letter to his two brothers that he never actually sends. Historians only find it, folded away among his papers, after his death. In it, he describes standing next to a friend, hearing a shepherd's flute in the distance, and realizing his friend can hear it, and he can't hear anything at all. He writes that he came close to ending his own life that year. Only his devotion to his music, he says, held him back. Today, that letter has a name of its own. Musicologists call it the Heiligenstadt Testament, and it reads less like a private diary entry and more like a goodbye. He doesn't say goodbye, though. He goes back to Vienna. He keeps composing. By his 40s, he is completely deaf. In 1824, he conducts the premiere of his Ninth Symphony, one of the most famous pieces of music ever written, the one with the Ode to Joy in it. When it ends, the audience erupts into applause. Beethoven, still facing the orchestra, can't hear any of it. A singer on stage has to gently take him by the shoulder and turn him around so he can actually see the ovation happening behind him. He is, by then, one of the most celebrated composers in Europe, and he cannot hear a single note of his own symphony. But the deafness isn't the whole story, and it never was. There's stomach pain that never fully leaves him for decades. Diarrhea that comes in waves lasting weeks at a time. Skin that turns yellow on and off for years. Headaches. Joint pain. A temper that gets worse every year, driving away friends, driving away collaborators, even straining his relationship with his own family. His doctors have no idea what's wrong with him. For 200 years, neither does anyone else. Theories pile up, one after another. Syphilis, because it was the era's default explanation for almost any mysterious illness. Lead poisoning, because his symptoms fit disturbingly well. An autoimmune disease. Chronic alcoholism. Irritable bowel disease. Sarcoidosis. Even a mineral water he drank for his health, which some historians think may have made him sicker instead of better. Each theory explains a piece of him. None of them explain all of him. Beethoven himself suspects something is deeply wrong beyond just his ears. In his final weeks, dying in 1827, he specifically asked his doctor for an autopsy after his death, hoping someone, someday, might actually figure out what happened to him. Doctors open him up. They find a severely damaged, shrunken liver, damaged kidneys, and inner ears with visible structural abnormalities. It's something. It is not, however, an answer. For the next 2 centuries, nothing new comes. Generations of doctors, historians, and musicologists argue over the same scraps of evidence, and nobody can prove anything. Then, in 2023, a team of scientists finally gets a real answer. It isn't the one anyone expected. Researchers sequenced Beethoven's DNA, extracted from several locks of his hair that had survived, passed hand to hand through collectors for 200 years. Using modern genome sequencing, technology that didn't exist even 20 years ago, they can finally read his actual genetic code. They're hunting for a genetic cause behind the deafness, a genetic cause behind the gut disease. Something buried in his DNA that could finally tie the whole picture together into one clean diagnosis. What they find instead, first, is a family secret. By comparing Beethoven's Y chromosome, the piece of DNA passed down virtually unchanged from father to son. To living male relatives who share his family name today, the researchers discover something startling. It doesn't match. Somewhere in Beethoven's direct paternal line, sometime between the 1570s and his own birth in 1770, a child was born who wasn't biologically the son of his supposed father. The Beethoven surname keeps passing down generation after generation, completely intact. The Beethoven Y chromosome quietly does not. An extramarital affair, an unknown biological father, a secret nobody alive at the time ever spoke of or maybe even knew about, hidden inside a family tree for roughly 400 years, until DNA sequencing accidentally stumbles onto it while looking for something else entirely. That's twist number one. Here's twist number two, and it's arguably the bigger one. For decades, one particular lock of hair was treated as the gold standard of Beethoven research. It's called the Hiller lock, supposedly snipped from Beethoven's head shortly after his death by a young composer named Ferdinand Hiller, who idolized him and wanted a physical piece of him to keep. For years, this specific lock was the single most cited physical sample in Beethoven science. A famous study from the early 2000s used it to claim Beethoven had catastrophic lead poisoning, lead levels around 100 times normal. That finding got repeated in documentaries, magazine articles, and textbooks for roughly 2 decades. It became, for a lot of people, the accepted final word on how Beethoven suffered. The 2023 genetic test proves the Hiller lock isn't Beethoven's hair at all. It belonged to a woman. An entire chapter of Beethoven's science, one of the most widely cited facts about his death, had quietly been billed on the wrong hair for 20 years and nobody had actually checked. So once the fake sample gets thrown out and the real DNA is properly matched to real Beethoven, what does it actually say? No genetic marker explains the deafness. No genetic marker explains the gut disease. Those two mysteries, for now, remain completely unsolved. But the real DNA does find something else. A strong inherited genetic risk for liver disease. Layered on top of that, evidence of a hepatitis B infection sometime in the months before he died. And layered on top of both of those, years of documented heavy drinking. 3 separate hits to the same organ, all landing at once. That combination, the research team concludes, is what actually killed him. Not lead poisoning, not syphilis. His liver, failing under 3 simultaneous attacks, it had no chance of surviving. So where does the lead actually fit into this story, if it didn't kill him? In 2024, a different research team goes back to 2 of the hair locks, now genetically confirmed as authentically his, using much more rigorous chain of custody documentation this time around, tracing exactly who owned each lock and when. The lead levels inside those verified locks are not just elevated. They are extraordinary, somewhere around 60 to 100 times the amount found in an average adult today. For comparison, a modern hospital would treat lead levels a small fraction of that as a serious medical emergency requiring immediate chelation therapy. Where was this much lead even coming from in the early 1800s? Cheap wine, across much of Europe at the time, was routinely sweetened using lead acetate, literally nicknamed sugar of lead by the people who used it. It tastes sweet. It makes sour, low-quality wine taste smoother and more expensive than it actually is. And in an era before modern chemistry existed, essentially nobody understood that they were sweetening their wine with slow poison. Beethoven was a known, heavy, daily wine drinker for most of his adult life. His own letters and the written accounts of his friends describe this openly, without any shame, because nobody thought it was dangerous. On top of that, he regularly ate fish pulled straight from the Danube River, which ran directly through an increasingly industrial Vienna and carried its own steady load of environmental lead. Even his drinking water, and the pewter cups common in that era, may have added a little more on top of everything else. None of it, on its own, would necessarily have been fatal, but together, sustained for decades, they after day, it built up to levels that today would be almost unthinkable in a living patient. And lead like that doesn't sit quietly in the body doing nothing. It attacks the nervous system. It attacks the gut, causing exactly the kind of severe, recurring abdominal pain Beethoven complained about for most of his adult life. It's strongly linked in modern medicine to irritability, mood swings, and cognitive changes, which lines up unsettlingly well with contemporaries' written accounts of his volatile, sometimes explosive temper in his later years. It probably wasn't what killed him, but it may explain an enormous amount of why so much of his life was spent in pain and why the people who loved him found him so difficult to be around, without either side ever knowing why. So here's where 2 centuries of mystery actually land, once every piece is finally on the table together. Not one clean answer. 3 separate causes, tangled together and mistaken for a single condition for 200 years. A genetic risk for liver disease he inherited and never knew about. A viral infection he likely caught near the very end of his life. And a heavy metal he drank into his body, glass after glass, year after year, from wine he thought was simply helping him relax. And buried in the middle of all of it, a family secret from centuries earlier that nobody was even looking for, discovered completely by accident, by scientists chasing an entirely different question. The deafness that made him famous, that shaped nearly every piece of music he's remembered for, that turned him from a celebrated pianist into one of history's most extraordinary composers precisely because he had to hear the music entirely inside his own head. Still, after 2 centuries of formal autopsy and a full modern DNA lab, nobody actually knows exactly why. Some mysteries don't get solved. They just get more interesting.